we'll see what happens. I've nothing to worry about, but just the betrayal is sort of shocking. But yeah, depressing. So
there is only one who will never disappoint us.
I agree. Yeah, exactly. So, well,
that is the one who is always shining in your heart as I.
Exactly. And a long time ago when we first talked, we talked about the heart, and I'm experiencing now like basically incredible pain in the heart region, like sort of been ripped out of me. How would that relate to Bhagavan's teachings?
The five sheaths are different levels of basically the same thing. So when we feel mental anguish, we feel it physically. That is quite natural. It's in that perspective that Bhagavan said the heart is on the right side of the chest, because you can notice it. If you, for example, if you're walking down the street and suddenly there's a car behind you honks its horn, or there's a very loud noise or something, you feel a shock. And you can actually, if you observe, you can feel it centered in 2 digits to the right from the center of the chest. So that is, as far as the physical form is concerned, that is the center. But that's, of course, relative only to the physical form. What Bhagavan means by heart is something far, far deeper. Heart is I am. Heart is what we actually are. Heart is the very center of everything. The center of everything, in which everything is included.
Including the pain and the heartache.
Yes,
perhaps.
Yes. All. Including the one who experiences the pain and the heartache. That's the important thing.
Good point, yeah.
Who is it who's experiencing that?
The ego, right?
Yeah. But we're not looking for an answer. We need to look at that one, because that, so long as we give it names, we are looking away from ourselves. When we look back at ourselves to see who is this I who is feeling all this pain, that I then disappears. And what remains, that is what we actually are.
Does that mean the pain is gone, or just...
Yes.
Or...
When the experience of the pain goes, the pain will also go with it.
Interesting.
The problem is, because of our unwillingness to let go of everything else, we don't turn within deeply enough or keenly enough to see what we actually are. Only when we see what we actually are will this ego disappear.
Okay. On that subject, I was thinking it might be useful to refer back to our conversation with His Eminence Metropolitan Callistos.
Yes.
I've watched it probably more than anyone else, so I've noticed some things that we didn't cover. So one point was, you said ultimately God is the heart, and His Eminence Metropolitan Callistos responded, no, we don't say the heart is God. We say heart is the meeting place of God. And I wanted to comment in there, in hindsight, there was actually a bit of a misunderstanding, really, which is that you were using the word heart differently. He uses the word heart like you do as a spiritual center, but in that moment, he was using the word heart as a physical center. So that was the confusion there, I think.
Yeah.
So, and then the other thing I'd like to comment on the interview was the only thing I personally disagreed with him, because I really liked that teaching, the Eastern Christian teachings. The only thing that I personally disagreed with was he said perhaps it's a difference of emphasis. So that was nice. But the main difference between you two, aside from the obvious things like church and sacraments or mysteries, is you said we merge into God, and he said we're united, but we're always persons. We're not. So anyway, I tend to agree that we merge into God. So that, but perhaps it's just sort of terminology there.
Even to say that we merge in God is only relatively true. Even now, we are nothing other than God. To the extent that we now seem to be something other than God, we seem to merge back into God. But actually, it's not even, it's just being as we always actually are, and recognizing ourselves as such.
Exactly. I saw an interview with you recently with a man, and he said something about how he doesn't want to pretend, he wants to be himself. And you said, oh yes, you should be yourself. And I thought that was really funny because you were using those terms differently. You were saying be yourself, Satchitananda, and he was saying be myself, like this is who I am.
Yeah.
That was cool. So yeah, lots of heartache.
We all have to begin from where we are now standing.
Exactly. Well, so I don't know what to do with my life situation. So if things get terribly bad, I'm just supposed to abide as I and not sort of think about it or worry about it or even kind of notice it?
Whether things get really bad or get really good or just stay as they are, that is what you're supposed to do. That means if you want to be happy, that is the only way to be happy. To the extent that the ego that is now aware of itself as I am shown, to the extent that subsides, to that extent you will be happy. Because that which rises as I am shown, that false I, the ego, is the only obstacle, or the only thing that stands between us and the infinite happiness that we actually are.
Okay, so how to get rid of this ego?
That's what Bhagavan's teachings are all about. Surrender yourself.
Okay. Yeah, okay.
It's not okay. You're supposed to ask, how do you surrender yourself?
Oh, when I say okay, I feel I'm doing it, but perhaps I'm not.
So long as there's an I doing it, we haven't surrendered.
I see.
The surrender is when I is completely effaced, eradicated. So the only way to bring about the completion of surrender is to turn within. Because what we are seeking to surrender is ourself, that is this ego. And this our self as ego is nothing but a false awareness of ourself. So we can get rid of this ego only by being aware of ourself as we actually are. So without self-investigation, we cannot complete the self-surrender. We can begin by trying our best to surrender our will to the will of God. But that is not surrendering ourselves. That is still surrendering only our will. In order to surrender the will completely, we need to surrender its root. And the root is ourself as ego. And that ego can be surrendered because the nature of ego, as Bhagavan says in verse 25 of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, the nature of ego is to rise, stand, and flourish by grasping form. That means by holding on to things other than itself. Only when it tries to hold on to itself, in other words, when it tries to turn its attention back to see who am I, will it subside back into the source from which it rose. That source from which it rose, that is us, what we actually are. That is ourself, our real nature, the heart.
Okay, I must get it on a very superficial level or something, because we
are all still on a relatively superficial level. When we get it correctly, we will have drowned. We will be, as Bhagavan said, becoming food is seeing. We have to be, in order to get it, in order to really see what Bhagavan is talking about, we need to lose ourselves.
That's a paradox, isn't it?
It may seem a paradox, but actually it's not at all paradoxical in the light of Bhagavan's teachings, because what we're losing is not what we can never lose what we actually are. We are only losing what we seem to be.
That makes sense.
In order to see what the snake actually is, you need to lose the snake.
Okay.
Because when you see what it actually is, oh, it's just a rope, then where is the snake? There never was a snake there. Likewise, when we try to see who am I, this ego, or where do I come from, or whatever, in the process of seeing what we actually are, we lose what we seem to be.
That makes sense. Commenting on the Eastern
and what
Christian,
we seem to be is not just this person, Michael or Sean. What we seem to be is the I that is aware of itself as I am Michael or Sean.
I don't quite follow that.
That is, there's a difference between ego and the person we take ourselves to be.
Right.
Ego is the I that is aware of itself as I am this person.
Right.
The person is just the outer shell, the five sheaths, the physical form, the life, the mind, the intellect, and the will. These are all adjuncts.
Yes.
Only when we grasp these adjuncts as I, that is, we rise as ego, grasping these adjuncts as I, and holding on to these adjuncts as I, we experience all other things. So that is the most important distinction to make, is this, that is, the person is an object. Everything about Michael is something perceived by me. The physical form is perceived, the life, the breath, and the heartbeat, and all these things perceived by me. The mind, the perceptions and the memories and all these grosser functions of mind are perceived by me. Even the working of the intellect is perceived by me. Not only the workings of the intellect, the likes, dislikes, desires, and attachments, the seeds of which are vasanas, are all seen by me. So I am the subject, they are objects.
But then who sees the I that sees the objects?
No, only the I that sees the object sees itself as the seer of the objects. When the seer of the objects turns back to see what it actually is, it disappears, and then what remains is the pure awareness. In the view of pure awareness, there was never any subject or object.
Just I am.
Yeah, that's a confusion in a lot of, if you listen to the more, to the majority of Advaitins, they will say, but behind the ego, there's a witness that is aware of the ego. Bhagavan clarified this because there's a lot of confusion in older texts. Bhagavan said the term sākṣi, witness, is used in two senses. The witness as the perceiver is ego. When it is sometimes said that our real nature or Brahman is the witness, their witness is being used in a different sense, in a deeper sense. Their witness simply means sanidhi, the presence. That is, it's in the presence of Brahman that all this appears. Not in the view of Brahman. Only in the view of Brahman as ego does all this appear. Not in the view of Brahman as Brahman.
Exactly.
So it's very subtle. It's very subtle. And Bhagavan's teachings are extremely simple, but at the same time, very subtle and very deep.
Well, what's interesting to me, and that I never really considered quite as robustly as you do, is that Ramana's teachings are more profound, more simple, more subtle than even like Shankaracharya's or really anyone else.
Yeah. I mean, it's not the Shankara didn't know all these things. He had a certain role to play at a certain time, and the teachings he gave were to people at a certain level. He may have given deeper teachings, like Bhagavan's teachings, to those who were very close to him. We don't know. I mean, obviously it was more than 1,000 years ago, so who are we to know? And maybe those who really understood him were not those who became the head of Shankara Mats, his successors. Maybe the ones who really understood him were completely unknown to the rest of the world.
Kind of like Tenai Swami, like Tenai Swami.
Yeah, or Murugan or such people. I mean, okay, Murugan was known, but what we know from Shankara is, firstly, I mean, the text for the most certainly Shankara's are the commentaries he wrote, the Prasthanatraya Bhashya, his commentaries on the triple source, on the Upanishads, Bhagavad Gītā and Brahma Sutra. Those commentaries are definitely his, and there are some other texts that are definitely his, and some texts that scholars like to dispute whether it's really Shankara or whether it was some other Shankaracharya. I mean, all these don't really matter, but we only know Shankara basically through his writings. What he may have taught to those who were, to the more mature people who approached him, may not have been recorded. We don't know.
You've just reminded me, after my adventure studying Christianity for so long and interacting with these people, I opened up the Swaminathan translation of Guru Vachakakovai, and the first verse I opened to is 820, and he has it translated, "One has to blame oneself alone if one should try to teach the truth supreme to those who are immature. These might reject the highest truth as false because it contradicted what they had been told before and had believed as true."
Yeah.
And then the second verse I randomly opened to was 330, without any offense to anyone. It says, "Give up forthwith, O mind, the friendship of worthless folks. Hereafter live in the company of sages, steadfast in their state of moveless stillness." And those very much resonated with me at the time. Yeah.
Bhagavan gets the right thing at the right time.
Yeah, that's true. So did you want to talk about anything that you have subtle disagreements with, say, someone like Swami Sarvapriyananda, who's very popular right now, or that could shed some light on that? Or
yes, that is Swami Sarvapriyananda. He explains, he makes the traditional explanations of Advaita very accessible to people. He explains in a very nice way, a very way that it's easy for people to grasp. And sometimes he goes a little deeper, like on last week, Bhagavan's Jayanti celebrations, the second talk he gave, the talk he gave later in the day, one of the second last question he answered was a question about there being no difference between waking and dream. Then he went a little deeper than he usually does. He then talked about the distinction between Srishti Drishtivada and Drishti Shrishtivada. And he said the majority of Advaitins, they following the Srishti Drishtivada. So sometimes he goes a little deeper, but most of his explanations are the more traditional ones, which are the so-called traditional, because there have always been many different understandings of Advaita at different levels and different even at the same level there are different interpretations. So but generally the sort of standard views as is taught in mats, the regular, if someone wants to whether in the Ramakrishna mission or in any Shankara mat or any other Advaita mat, the sort of text that they usually go through. So he talks very much from that perspective. There are many things, Bhagavan has simplified, refined, and clarified things. And also, Bhagavan's teachings go far deeper. Though they're very simple, they're actually far deeper. One thing I could point out, I recently listened to one of his, he's giving a series of talks on Vedanta Sara, which is a sort of standard primer textbook. That's the first introduction to Advaita, to understand all the basic definitions of Advaita and everything. On one of those, I think it is, I think so far 15 or so of them have come out. I don't know exactly. It was 15 when I last saw. I haven't watched all of them. I mean, I don't watch them. When I go for a walk, sometimes I listen to portions of them. So I was listening to the 12th in that series. And towards the end, someone asked him about samskaras. Samskaras, as I understand it, it means more or less the same as vasanas. Bhagavan generally talks to vasanas rather than samskaras, but I think samskaras is another term that is used to mean vasanas. So this person asked him about samskaras or vasanas, and the answer he gave, it quite appalled me actually, because what he said is, no, you need not be concerned about samskaras, because in other paths they try and purify the mind, that is to reduce the samskaras. But in Advaita, we are not interested in that. We're interested only, the problem is avidya, ignorance. What is the solution to get rid of ignorance? You need knowledge. So in Advaita, we are not concerned about the samskaras or anything. I mean, it's maybe good for the mind to be purified, but that's not our central aim. Our central aim is only to acquire knowledge. And to acquire knowledge, we need to study all these scriptures and all these texts and understand them. I mean, that was more or less what he said. Anyone who wants can listen to that video and hear exactly what he said, but that was more or less the gist of it. And he even said, I think, at one point, but after you realize Brahman, then you can, if the samskaras are still a problem, you can deal with them. that itself is a fallacy, because when the knower of Brahman becomes Brahman, as it said even in the Upanishads, that means, it doesn't mean actually we become Brahman. When we can know Brahman only by being Brahman. As Bhagavan said, in verse 26 of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, Tānai iritale, Tānai aridalam. That is, being oneself alone is knowing oneself. So we can, what we actually are, or what is called Brahman, is nothing but pure awareness. What can know pure awareness? Can anything other than pure awareness know pure awareness? Obviously not. So pure awareness is known only by pure awareness. So it's only by being what we actually are, but we know what we actually are. When we know ourselves as we actually are, or as Brahman as it's called, does Brahman have any samskaras that it needs to worry about? Obviously not. So the very definition of Brahmanyana, of knowing Brahman, is brought about by vasanakshaya. And vasanakshaya means destruction of all vasanas. And in order to destroy all vasanas, you need to destroy the root, which is ego. So it's also called manonasam. Regarding what he said about we need not be concerned about samskaras, according to Bhagavan, that is the main problem. That is, the root problem is ego. But in order to be free of this root problem, we need to surrender this ego by self-investigation. But what is it that is preventing us surrendering this ego? So long as our mind has an inclination to go outwards towards other things, we are unwilling to let go. Those inclinations to go outwards are what are called vishaya vasanas. And they are so long as we have strong vishaya vasanas, we are unwilling to surrender, to turn within and thereby surrender this ego. So Bhagavan uses an analogy in Nāṉ Ār. I think it's the 11th paragraph. He says, he compares vasanas like enemies in a fortress. So long as there are enemies in the fortress, they'll keep on coming out. But if we continue cutting them down as and when they come, the fortress will finally fall into our hands. We'll finally capture the fortress. In that analogy, the vasanas, I mean, the enemy coming out are the vasanas. And it's only when we cut down the vasanas one by one, I mean, as and when they come, will we finally be able to enter the fortress. The fortress is the heart. And that is where ego is hiding. So we can extend that analogy Bhagavan has given. That is, the vasanas is like an army. And the general of the army is ego. So long as the army of vasanas are strong, we cannot get at the general. That is, our aim is to kill the general. If we kill the general, then all his troops will disperse. But in order to get hold of a general and kill him, we first need to greatly reduce the strength of his army of vasanas. So long as he's got a strong army of vasanas, we cannot get near him. In other words, so long as we've got strong Vishaya vasanas, we are unwilling to turn within. So by this practice of self-investigation and self-surrender, we are, though Bhagavan said, cut them down as and when they come, it's not literally that we remove one vasana at a time. It's as we proceed in this, as we progress in this practice, slowly, we are weakening the Vishaya vasanas. That is, the Vishaya vasanas are our inclination to go outwards. So the more we try to turn, every time we turn our attention within, we are resisting the urge to go outwards, and we are cultivating the urge, we're liking to go inwards. That liking to go inwards is what is called satvasana. So in other words, we are increasing the bhakti, the love to turn within, and we're also increasing the vairāgya, the freedom from inclination to go outwards. So without bhakti and vairāgya, we'll never succeed in this path. So we cultivate that bhakti and vairāgya. In other words, we strengthen our sattvasana and weaken our vishaya vasanas by persistently trying to turn within. And even when we are turned outwards, the practice of self-surrender continues. We're constantly trying to subdue ego. We're constantly trying not to assert ourselves. We're constantly trying to yield ourselves to Bhagavan. So the self-surrender should be going on even when we allow our mind to go outwards. To the extent possible, we should be yielding ourselves. But for the surrender to become deep, we need to turn within. So this is what is happening. So this is how the mind is purified. There are other means of purifying the mind. You can purify the mind by various practices of bhakti. What purifies the mind in most practices is not the practices themselves, but the love with which we do them. But now we've come to Bhagavan's path. This is the pinnacle of the path of bhakti, we can say.
I just read in talks that Bhagavan said Atma-vichara, vichara is parabhakti.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, what I often say is the pinnacle of the path of bhakti is surrender. Because when you truly love God, you want to give yourself to God. And the pinnacle of the path of surrender is Atma-vichara, because we can bring about the completion of surrender only by self-investigation. So this when we, as Bhagavan says in verse 26 of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, if ego comes into existence, everything comes into existence. If ego doesn't exist, everything doesn't exist. Ego itself is everything. Therefore, investigating what it is giving up everything. That is, if we investigate this ego, we're thereby giving up ego. And when we give up ego, we give up everything. So it's only when there's all-consuming love, when we have greater love for just being as we are, then any desire, I mean, when our love to be as we actually are is stronger than all our other desires put together, then only will our surrender become complete. So this, during this practice of self-investigation and self-surrender, we are purifying the mind. That is, we are reducing the strength of our Vishaya vasanas. And that is absolutely essential. We cannot get Brahmanyana just by studying books.
Exactly.
Bhagavan says that very clearly in the 16th paragraph of Nāṉ Ār. And then in the 17th paragraph, he gives the analogy. In earlier versions of Nāṉ Ār, he refers to a barber, but when he wrote an essay, he removed the reference to a barber, but I mean, it applies. He says in the essay version, just like rubbish that is to be swept away and discarded, there's no need to examine the rubbish that is to be discarded. But
Exactly.
earlier he said a little more graphically, he said, just like in a barber shop, where all the hair that's fallen on the barber shop, and he doesn't actually go into so much detail, but the implication is just like you don't examine the hairs, how many gray hairs, how many red hairs, how many long hairs, how many short hairs, how many beard hairs, how many top hairs, and we don't, I mean, there's so many differences, those hairs. If we're interested, we can spend a lot of time. We can collect all those hairs and we can examine each one and we can do DNA analysis or whatever we want on them. But what is our aim? All these, the aim of when we sweep the barber shop, it's not in order to analyze the hair, it's in order to discard it. Likewise, all these tattvas that are concealing oneself are to be discarded. There's no point in analyzing them. There, Bhagavan is directly referring to texts like Vedanta Sara, which go into so much detail. The subtle body consists of pranamaya kosha, manamaya kosha, and vijnanamaya kosha. They don't stop with that. The subtle body has 19 parts. It's got the, 17 parts, sorry. I've got to get it correct. The numbers have to be very correct. It's got the 5 types of prana, the 5 instruments of instruments of knowledge, the sense organs, and the 5 instruments of action. Plus, I think they say 2 of the antakaran. I think it's manas and buddhi or something. But anyway, they make 17. All according to Bhagavan, these are all rubbish, which has to be discarded. What is the point of enumerating all these things and analyzing all these things? The main point is, this is not I, neti. It's not I. Once you've understood that it's not I, why to give it another thought? What do we want to know? Do we want to know what is not I, or do we want to know what is I? What is I? It's shining in our heart as I am. That's what we have to turn towards. That's what we need to not analyze, but we need to investigate. We need to scrutinize. And Bhagavan also in Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, he says in verse, I think it's verse 29, if I remember correctly, Bhagavan refers to, he says, Bhagavan defines what is the path of knowledge. He says, not saying I by mouth, investigating by an inward sinking mind, where one rises as I, alone is the path of knowledge. So in other words, the mind has to turn within and sink within. That is alone is the path of knowledge. Instead, thinking not this, I am that, is an aid. Is it investigation? The implication when he says, Atma-vichara, is it investigation? The implication is, no, it is not investigation. But this is what most of the traditional Advaitins, they think studying all these books that enumerate all the things that are not I, and then negates them one by one and explains why they're not I. And then what remains is Brahman, and that Brahman is I. You have to contemplate on that Brahman, which is I. Bhagavan says that is not investigation. What is investigation? Investigation is only by turning the mind inwards and sinking within. Investigating the where one rises as I. Where do we rise as I? From what do we rise as I? Only from our own real nature. That is from the pure awareness that we actually are. That is what we need to investigate. So investigating all these tattvas and all the complicated, I mean, there's no end to the complication. I mean, Vedanta Sara is a relatively small work. It only runs to just over 200 verses. But the same ideas are expanded into vast, vast texts. And Bhagavan, in one place in talks, he said he talks about these some of these vast Advaitic texts, and he says, what is the use of all these things? But people who have a taste to read these things, they will not be attracted to really useful texts like Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu. It's not put Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu there. I think it says Truth Revealed, which was the person who recorded talks, Munagala Venkataramaya, his English translation of talks was called Truth Revealed. So, but Bhagavan actually would have said it's Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu. So Bhagavan says that Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu is a really useful text, but reading all these books, why is Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu really useful? Because Bhagavan is constantly pointing out what is the problem, the root of everything, the root of the dyads and triads, that the pairs of opposites, and the knower, the knowing, and the known, the root of knowledge and ignorance, the root of fate and will, the root of the doer of karma, the cause of bondage. It's all ego. So we need to investigate this ego. If we investigate this ego, it will subside and disappear. So Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu is a very useful text because it is so practical. Firstly, the philosophy that Bhagavan is teaching us in Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu is extremely simple. It's all summarized in verse 26. If ego comes into existence, everything comes into existence. If ego doesn't exist, everything doesn't exist. Ego is everything. In other words, ego is the entire problem.
In a private email, you said that it would be appropriate to maybe not translate, but to consider the word there, everything, as phenomena. And at the time I wrote that email, I thought it was important just because a lot of the time people will say the self or God is everything, but they will never say, or at least if they know what they're talking about, they won't say the self or God is phenomena. So I just wanted to make that clear for at least some people.
They do. They say all this world is Brahman.
Yeah. What do you say to that? It is, though, right? All this world is Brahman, but it's as Bhagavan.
Yes, but Bhagavan refines that. It is said in the Upanishads, everything is Brahman. But Bhagavan says everything is ego. So is Bhagavan contradicting the Upanishads? No. Bhagavan is just refining what is said in Upanishad. How is everything Brahman? Everything is ego. That is, all this is a mental projection. The seed of this mental projection, the one who has projected all this, is ego. So all this is only an expansion of ego. And what is ego? If you investigate ego, you find it is nothing but Brahman. So in that sense, everything is everything is Brahman. But if you miss out that the intermediary ego, you can think, oh, I see everything as Brahman. Who is the I who sees everything? It's only ego. So when you say I see everything as Brahman, you're not actually seeing everything as Brahman, because you're not even seeing yourself as Brahman. When you see yourself as Brahman, you will see Brahman alone exists. There is no everything. There is only one thing, that is Brahman.
That's very important. I think that's a really important, subtle, deep point that is very easily missed. And I want to say, I think it's your most complicated and difficult to understand, it's not presentation of Bhagavan's teachings, in my view. It's very difficult to grasp, I think.
It is not complicated. It's extremely simple. It's difficult to grasp only if you're unwilling to accept that it's so simple. For most people, they're unwilling to let go of all their beliefs in the world and the body and all these things. So long as we're attached to these things, then we're unwilling to grasp. That is, I often say, Bhagavan teachings are extremely easy to understand. They're difficult to accept. If we're willing to accept them, there's nothing simpler than Bhagavan's teachings. There's no complexity at all in Bhagavan's teachings. It's extremely simple. What can be simpler than saying everything is ego? Get rid of ego and you get rid of everything. I mean, Bhagavan is so simple and so clear and so logical.
I have a response to that, which is Renata, I guess her name is, I think, from Conscious TV. She responded specifically in another interview to your interview with Ian, and she said, when Michael just spoke with you, Ian, he said that, basically the world is an illusion, and her point of view is, oh, the world is so beautiful. What do you say to something like that?
Beauty is also an illusion. But what is really beautiful, They say beauty is in the eye of the beholder. That is, whatever beauty we see in the world. Why do we say beautiful sunset or beautiful forest or the ocean, or these are beautiful things? But go to a dirty slum, oh, it's very ugly, we say. But the beauty and the ugliness is what we like, we call beautiful. What we dislike, we call ugly. It's what is beautiful or what is ugly is determined only by our likes and dislikes. If you're particularly masochistic or sadistic, and you like seeing people suffering, there's nothing more beautiful than a slum where people are dying of disease and everything, in your view, but that's what you like to see. And the sunset is not at all beautiful. It's very uninteresting because you like to see people suffering. So beauty is entirely according to what we like. Because why we think the slum and wars and famines, all these things are very ugly in our view. Why? Because when we see these things, we picture ourselves in such situations. And we don't like that. So we say, oh, this is very ugly. This is very, very cruel, very bad.
I've heard a couple people describe war as beautiful. Joseph Campbell and recently a newscaster talking about the bombs being beautiful and so forth.
It's all according to your likes and dislikes. But Bhagavan has said the real beauty, those who find beauty outside are those who haven't seen the beauty inside. If you see the beauty inside, all external forms of beauty will fade into fade in comparison. They're nothing compared to the great beauty that is always shining in our heart's eye.
I agree with you. I would say, however, that I think beautiful aesthetic things can help in purifying the mind. Like, for example, well, it depends on what it might be, but like say bhajans, right? Like beautiful music, things like Sadhu Om's compositions.
Yeah. I mean, and also for many religious people, they see the world is God's creation. So they see the beauty of God's creation.
Exactly.
All that, it's all okay at a certain level, but we need to go deeper. And ultimately, we need to understand all this, whatever beautiful or ugly things we see outside, it's all our own mental projection. Why do all these things appear? Because we see them. The opening words of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, Bhagavan says, Nāmu Kandalal, because we see the world. So the world is as it is because we see it. In sleep, how is the world? Is it beautiful or ugly? It's neither, because it doesn't exist, because we're not there to see it. Only when we rise as ego and wake or dream, do we see a world. And then we say it's beautiful or ugly, it's happiness or misery or whatever.
As far as purifying
real or unreal.
As far as purifying the mind, I know in your book, Happiness and the Art of Being, you do talk, as I recall, about, like the things we consume, not just food, which needs to be vegan or vegetarian, but in your view, vegan, preferably, given today's climate in regard to ahimsa, non-harm of animals with the factory farms and whatnot. But then also, and this I always never really followed when I was younger, but now I haven't even been watching television hardly at all. I've finally just unplugged it. In fact, I haven't been watching movies, and it really helps actually just to sort of cultivate a more peaceful, clear mind,
Yeah.
What do you think? Those are good practices, right?
What Bhagavan says, the term that Bhagavan uses in Nāṉ Ār when he talks about this, he says, Mita Sattvika Ahara. Ahara, generally it means food, but actually the meaning of ahara is what is taken in. So there's the physical food that we eat, but there's also the food for the senses. That is what we are seeing, what we are hearing. These all have an effect on the mind. Watch a violent movie or spend repeat. If you cultivate a liking to watch violent movies, it will definitely have an impact on your mind.
Yeah, one of my young friends who is Catholic, he has videos on the internet where he likes to play a horror film actor in this video game he plays, and he's chopping people up, and he's still nice about it. He goes, "Sorry, buddy," but he's chopping people up. That can't be healthy, right?
It's why to, and already our mind is just is lacking in peace. Why to disturb that peace with all these video games and all this violent films or whatever?
That's how I feel too.
It's fine. Some people have a taste for that. That's fine for them. But we are dissatisfied. Why have we come to Bhagavan's path? Because we've sought happiness in so many places externally, and we have been disappointed. We've come to the understanding, but whatever happiness we seem to derive from things outside, it's all very fleeting, impermanent. We can't find true satisfaction in anything external, whether in wealth or in relationships or in name and fame, and then there's nothing that can satisfy us.
It's really hard to learn that, to be honest. I still have a preference for being in a relationship, and I always have this idea that it's going to sort of complete me, just like a lot of people, I imagine. But I've been disappointed in that way so many times. I think I finally just recently broken the illusion, hopefully, you know?
That relationships these are very, very deep-rooted things. That is, we are social animals. And so long as we identify ourselves as a body, we are sexual animals. We feel sexual attraction. So, I mean, I'm not saying that relationships are all about sex, but that is in a loving, caring relationship. That's also a dimension of it. So these are all very, very deep-rooted. So long as we identify ourselves as a body, all these needs seem to be there. We need not force ourselves to give up these things. So long as we've still got a need, we still feel a liking for a loving, caring relationship. We need not say, "Oh no, this is bad." That Bhagavan was not. Bhagavan never recommended external forms of renunciation. He said external renunciation, it's all according to prarabdha. For some people, they're destined to be married and to have a family and to have all the responsibility of earning to look after the family. Other people, it's their destiny to be a sannyasi or a monk or whatever. That is not, you can outwardly, you can renounce everything. What is the use of all that external renunciation if you've still got desires in your heart? So renunciation, what Bhagavan recommended is the internal renunciation. He wasn't opposed. If it's someone's destiny to be a sannyasi, Bhagavan would never say, "Oh, don't become a sannyasi." Bhagavan neither recommended it nor was against it, because he was interested only in internal renunciation. He taught us repeatedly in so many ways. He said, for example, he said, the householder, that is a family person, who does not feel "I am a householder" is a better sannyasi than the sannyasi who feels "I am a sannyasi." So Bhagavan was only concerned with the internal renunciation. So by merely denying ourselves, so supposing you're in a loving relationship and you try to say, "Oh no, this is all attachment and everything, I want to give all this up." That is not, it's in our heart we need to give it up. So whatever be the external circumstances, whether we're in a relationship or not in a relationship, all these things come according to destiny. It's the internal, whatever seeds of the desires and attachment that lead to all these things, they are the vasanas. That is what we need to be tackling by constantly trying to turn our mind within. So, and Bhagavan talked about his path. When he compared his path with the path of yoga, he said yoga is like if a cow has wandered away from its stall and has gone off to eat grass somewhere else. If you want to bring it back to its stall, if you run after it with a stick, you're going to get pretty tired, because wherever you run, the cow is going to run some other way. He said, better than that is to tempt it with some nice green grass and slowly cajole it back to its shed and then shut it inside. he said, yoga is like running after a cow with a stick, whereas vichara is a gentle path. It's like tempting the cow with green grass. So there's a verse in Bhagavad Gītā, Sanne uparamet, slow, that is gradually, gently, slowly, bring the mind and fix it in Atma. Atma samstam madakritva. Na kinchitapi chintayat. Do not think in the least of anything else. Bhagavan has translated that verse into Tamil. I think that's verse chapter 6, verse 25 in the Bhagavad Gītā, and it's verse 27 in Bhagavad Gītā Sāram. That is the 42 verses that Bhagavan translated into Tamil. So the term in Sanskrit, sanne, means slowly, gently, gradually. And Bhagavan in Tamil translated it as mella, which means the same. So we can't overcome our vasanas by forcibly trying to renounce them. We need to slowly turn our mind within, give our mind a taste for the happiness and peace that lies inside. And thereby we slowly, gently wean our mind off its inclination to go outwards.
And we need to always abide as that and not worry about any sort of external, quote unquote, circumstances, and just always abide as that. And then Bhagavan is taking care of us, and whatever happens.
Exactly. What is going to happen, that's all that's going to happen to us, is already predetermined by prarabdha. Why Bhagavan taught this karma theory, or the law of karma, as he did, it is to free our mind from concern about external things. If everything is predetermined, and not only is everything predetermined, whatever we need to do in order to experience what is predetermined, we will be made to do. That is, our body, speech, and mind will be made to do whatever is necessary. We don't have to worry about either about what happens or about what we should do. We can leave everything to Bhagavan and turn within. Without,
I think if people could really accept that teaching, you would have so much peace. And it's so simple, but that's what makes it hard to accept, is because it's so simple, perhaps.
People need not accept it. If the I that is aware of itself as I am shown, if that I accepts it, that is sufficient for you.
Exactly. Thanks for reminding me that. I think you're right.
But when we look outwards, we see minds of all varieties. So many different interests, likes, dislikes people have, so many philosophies. Philosophies show how the mind is attracted to different ideas. And I mean, that's just one area of diversity, but every area. What's your favorite sport? Is it American football or soccer or cricket or tennis? Or wherever we look, there's diversity, because different things appeal to different people. Do you like Indian food or Italian food or this food or that food? Or when we look outwards, there's multiplicity and diversity. And there's no end to differences. But when we look within, there is peace.
I saw that you're included in a new book called The Greatest Secret. How did that happen?
Well, the production manager, the author of that book, wrote to me and said that the author wanted to quote from my book. So sure, why not? Anything that gets Bhagavan's teachings out in front of people, that is, many people who read that book, they may just, I don't think that book is going very deep. It's appealing to a certain type of mindset, but some people who read will want to know more and will try and learn more about Bhagavan. So, we need not stand in the way of these things, but I wouldn't attach too much importance to these sort of things. These popular books, they are opening the door to people. Some will go in the door just a little way. Some will want to go further inside. So, Bhagavan has his own way of working, how he how he is slowly going to draw people to his path. But it's Bhagavan's teachings are very, very deep. To the extent that they become popular, the majority of people who are drawn to his teaching, they will not be understanding, because but there'll always be a few who want to go deeper, and the deeper we go, the more we get out of them. So it's up to people. Well, everyone will find their own natural level.
From my perspective, it's beneficial just to even like see Ramana's photo, you know, like that's beneficial without any understanding, you know.
So many people have been attracted to Bhagavan just by seeing his photo on the front cover of a book or something. So who are we to understand the ways in which he attracts people? And once he attracts people to him, then having been attracted to him, how deep are we going to go? We may be having only a fairly superficial interest at first, but slowly, slowly, he will draw us to go deeper and deeper and deeper. So everything is whatever is nothing. There's a saying in Tamil, Avanarulandri or Anuvumasayadu. That means except by his grace, Avanarulandri, except by his grace, or Anuvumasayadu, not even an atom will move. So whatever is happening is all happening according to his plan. So when we know that, that makes our surrender so much easier. It's easier for us to turn within when we know whatever is happening as it's meant to happen, and we cannot change anything. The only thing we have control over is our own ego, our own vasanas. Are we going to allow ourselves to be swayed by our vasanas, or are we going to turn back within and try and merge back into our source? That is where our freedom lies. If we allow ourselves to be swayed by vasanas, then we'll be creating so much fresh karma and everything. That's also a choice, but that's a wrong choice. A wise choice is to resist the pull of the Vishaya vasanas and yield ourselves to the Sat Vasana, the inclination just to be.
Sounds good. One question I had, I'm not sure how much time you have, but one question I had was, how important is Ramana's culture to understanding his teachings? Because it seems to me that he's a figure sort of like Plato, or one of these people that you sort of don't have to be immersed in the culture per se, but just sort of appreciate the universality, the universal nature of his teachings. What do you think about that?
What is Bhagavan's culture? Superficially, we can say this South Indian Hindu culture, but that's only very superficially. What is Bhagavan's real culture? His real culture is Summa Irupadu, just being.
Awesome. Very good point. I'm glad I asked that. Thank you.
But we haven't yet reached that point. So it will vary from person to person, because in my case, for example, I just take an example because we're all different. But in my case, I came to know about Bhagavan. I was drawn to Bhagavan after going to South India, and I happened to spend 20 years in Tiruvannamalai as a devotee of Bhagavan. So I was able to immerse myself in the culture. And I can see the benefits in that. I mean, there are benefits, but it's not essential. I mean, there may be some people who are living in Europe or America or South America or Africa or somewhere who never have the opportunity to go to India or to Tiruvannamalai. For them, they can, if they're attracted to Bhagavan's teaching, that's all that really matters.
And you have said before that if one wants a physical guru in the present moment, we should take Aruṇācala as guru. Is that right?
Well,
or just Bhagavan.
Bhagavan himself has pointed out Aruṇācala as the physical form of guru. He sings in Aruṇācala Akṣaramaṇamālai in verse 19, I think it is. Kutra mudrarutane gunamai panital guru guru vayoli Aruṇācala. Wait a second, I think it's verse... Yes, verse 19 of Aruṇācala Akṣaramaṇamālai. Kutramutru, that means Kutramutru Arutu, that means completely destroying my defects. What does he mean by when he says Kutram means defect, Mutru means completely. So completely destroying my defects. Completely destroying my defects. What is the root of all defects? Ego. So it implies destroying my ego. Ene gunamai panital, making me gunam. Gunam means quality or good quality. It implies making me one endowed with good qualities. What is the good quality? Egolessness. So gunamai panitu, that means making me that. All means take control of me, take charge of me, take charge of me. That's the best way of putting it. Like if a small child is orphaned, kind relatives take charge of them. That means they take responsibility for them. They provide all their needs, and they also guide them. So they become like a parent to them. So all is a very beautiful word, but Bhagavan often uses in Aruṇācala Stuti Panchakam. There's no exact equivalent in English, but I think the closest we can say is take charge of me. There's also a word in Tamil for God, which is Andavan. Andavan means the one who has taken charge. So it's a word that's used a lot in Tamil devotional literature, and Bhagavan used it a lot. So gunamai panital, that is destroying my defects completely. That implies along with ego, and making me endowed with the good quality. The best of all qualities is egolessness. Take charge of me. Why? That is Guru Vuru Vayoli Aruṇācala. Aruṇācala who shine as the form of Guru. So what is the function of Guru? The function of Guru is completely eradicating all our defects along with their root ego, establishing us in that state of egolessness, and thereby taking complete charge of us. That is, in that verse, Bhagavan has revealed what is the responsibility of Guru, and who is Guru? That's if we want Guru, and truly speaking, as Bhagavan said, Guru is that which is always shining in our heart as I. But because our minds are outward going, Guru appears outwardly in the human form of Bhagavan and in the hill form of Aruṇācala. People nowadays, there's so many people are so enthusiastic to be gurus. People aren't so interested in being disciples. It's much more interesting to be a guru. But people who want to be gurus, they have no idea what is a guru, what is the responsibility of a guru. Only Bhagavan and Aruṇācala can be guru. That's all these would-be gurus. They're just egos dancing around thinking, I am great. I can save you. Who is that I? Who is that I who wants to, can we save ourselves for a start? As ego is the very opposite of salvation. In order to be saved, we need to give up this ego. So in order for ourselves to be saved, we need to give up this ego. How can we, while still rising as ego, hope to save others?
Hey, Michael, actually, I'm so glad you said that, because I read someone made a critical comment on your book, and maybe it'd be a nice time to clarify it. You've just said Bhagavan and Aruṇācala are the only guru, and this person was saying, there's lots of great teachers, and Ramana is just one of them, and stuff like that. And he made the claim that you're a fundamentalist, and I took objection to that. I didn't want to make a big deal about it, but I thought perhaps you'd like to point out that mistake, why he's mistaken in his view, if you'd like to.
I am a fundamentalist.
Okay,
at least I would like to be a fundamentalist, because what is the fundamental? The fundamental reality is I am. So being as I am is being fundamentalist. But unfortunately, I'm not sufficiently fundamentalist. There is only one guru. That guru is that which is shining in the heart of each and every one of us as I. Guru appears outwardly in order to turn our attention within. It is not necessary that there should only be one external form. According to different needs at different times. Guru may appear in different forms, but in our, if we have a good fortune, but in our life, Guru has appeared in the form of Bhagavan to turn our attention within. So there are other great gurus, Buddha, Shankara, Krishna, Rama, Jesus. There's so many great gurus are there. I'm nothing against these gurus, but for us, the form of guru is Bhagavan or Aruṇācala, because what is special about Bhagavan and Aruṇācala? They have only one aim, and one aim alone, that is eradication of ego. That is the ultimate goal. Other spiritual paths have other intermediate goals, and there are gurus appropriate to those intermediate goals. There are gurus who can guide you towards intermediate goals, but the ultimate goal is the eradication of ego that is seeking to attain any goal at all.
If I could circle...
But the goal that Bhagavan shows us is the goalless goal, because it's a goal that we will never achieve, because we achieve it by being swallowed by it. So
exactly.
there'll be no I say, I have achieved the goal. So long as that
Good
I
point.
is there, we have not achieved the goal. When that I goes, only the goal remains. That is what we always actually are.
That's a great point.
So
Circling back,
there are so many religions, so many different spiritual paths. They all appropriate, all have their own place, because everything, as Bhagavan said, God and Guru are not, in truth, not different. So if we take all religions, more or less, say, but the world is ruled by God. So there's one God. There's also one Guru. Guru may take different forms, like God may take different forms. But that which Guru actually is only one. And that is what is, as Bhagavan always emphasized, that is what is shining in the heart as I. That is what we actually are.
If I could circle back really quick to theosis, the Eastern Christian view of what I consider to be enlightenment, or in any case, participating in the life of God. If I could just speak very quickly from personal experience, to me, it's kind of like the best possible way, the most comfortable way of being not an ego, not an individual, but you're united with God, but you're still separate at the same time. You're still unique and different. And it's sort of, to me, like the nicest way of being human in a way, rather than being Bhagavan himself.
Yeah, well, it's all, these are what I say, these are all intermediate goals. Bhagavan has provided an answer to ideas like theosis. In India, in all Indian religions, the ultimate goal is what is called mukti or moksha, or sometimes nirvana, or it's given various names, but the usual name is mukti or moksha. It means liberation. That all the different spiritual traditions in India believe in some type of liberation, but they each have their own different views about what liberation is. So all the different views about liberation can be divided into three groups. That is, some people believe you retain your individuality, you remain separate from God. So that is liberation with form. That is, if you're an individual, you've got a form of your own. You're something separate from God. So there's liberation with form. Some people believe that when you're liberated, you're free either to take form or to be formless. So that is liberation with or without form. And the other type of liberation is formless. You're always formless. So Bhagavan says in this final verse of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, if it is said that the liberation one will experience is three, that means of three kinds: form, formless, form, formless. That means with form, without form, or without form. I will say, know that the ego form, which distinguishes these three types of liberation, with form, without form, with or without form, this ego form being destroyed alone is liberation. So all theosis is a type of liberation with form.
Another thing I'd like to say though, from personal experiences, I think it can actually be a bad thing for certain people to hear things like ego destruction, ego annihilation, and so forth, whereas a Christian view is more like God loves us. I know Bhagavan loves us too, but it's more like God loves me, I'm a good person. It's sort of like healthy ways of being, quote unquote, an ego, rather than sort of, I'm no longer an ego whatsoever.
That's what I say. These are all intermediate goals. They're all appropriate.
Exactly.
But to think God loves us, so long as God seems to be something other than ourselves, the love where there are two is incomplete love. But perfect love is love where there is only one. That is, self-love is alone the infinite love, the fullness of love.
I agree with that. And that was honestly another little disagreement I had with His Eminence Metropolitan Callistos is, in the Bible it says God is love. Yeah. And for him, love is to have a subject and an object.
Yeah.
I think that's completely legitimate. But from my perspective, when we say God is love, it's a higher love without distinction.
Yeah. Many people argue, but love is always for the other. But actually, as Bhagavan points out in the first paragraph of Nāṉ Ār, what is the one thing that we all have greatest love for? We all have greatest love for ourselves. In the case of self-love, there are no others. That is, however much we may love others, we love them because they make us happy. So the greatest love we all have is love for ourselves. So if you want love to be infinite, undivided, it has to be the state of one. Only in the state of oneness is love. Does love reach its perfection, its fullness?
I agree, but to be honest, it can sound confusing when we say love ourself. It needs to be clear that it needs to be crystal clear that we don't mean ego. Obviously, you don't mean ego, but it needs to. We need to say when we say love ourselves, it doesn't exclude anyone. It means infinite, perfect whole, as you're saying.
As ego, we love ourselves, but ego is not what we actually are. If we know ourselves as we actually are, then we will love ourselves as we actually are. What we actually are is the one infinite whole, that is what people refer to as God. God is love. God is also our own real nature. So we are love. So
another thing
that Bhagavan has expressed it very beautifully in verse 101 of Aruṇācala Akṣaramaṇamālai. Ambu vilalipol amburuvunilene anbai karetaral Aruṇācala. Aruṇācala, graciously melt me as love in you, the form of love. Or like ice in water, melt me as love in you, the form of love. If an iceberg is floating around in the ocean, what is the iceberg? It's nothing other than the ocean, but it's a solidified bit of the ocean. So that if that iceberg melts, what remains is only ocean as ocean. Likewise, we need to lose, like the iceberg dissolving in the ocean, we need to lose ourselves in love. So melt me as love in you, the form of love.
And that, at the end of the day, is the only type of love that will satisfy, because we want to be completely whole with, God, with Bhagavan, with Ramana.
If we truly love God, why should we want to remain separate from God? We should want to give ourselves wholly to God, lose ourselves in God, let God alone remain. Then only the love for God is full.
Amen. Okay, well, thanks a lot.
The one who will never let us down is Bhagavan.
Thank you for reminding me that. I agree with that. I'll keep persisting in that.
But he won't take only your money. Watch out. He will take you.
Exactly. Beautiful. Thank you.